no, sorry. We're going to continue now. No. Sorry. Can I now proceed with the meeting? Right. So now, having heard from the councillor making the call-in, one of the ward councillors and several of the residents with various points, and we've got lots of things in the papers to ask about, and now's the opportunity for us to ask questions of the cabinet member responsible and the officers who are responsible for this area. Can I suggest that we try and divide it into the three areas that are in Councillor Ainsley's call-in in what he wants us to do, which I will remind us are: number one, the due diligence of the financial duty; number two, the consideration of the people's plan; and number three, the removal of key rights. Let's start with the first one, which is the most complex of them. The allegation that Councillor Ainsley made is that the council has not properly considered all of the financial data, that it hasn't carried out due diligence. Obviously, the more specific questions that have been asked have been answered within the papers. Obviously, we've heard some more questions from residents and from Councillor Ainsley, specifically about the financials. Perhaps it would be useful to remind ourselves of some of... I'm going to use your first name, Galinda, if you don't mind, rather than mispronouncing your second name again, if that's not disrespectful. Of some of the points you... Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
What, your first name and something or other?
So, some of the points that were made there was that the HRA business plan has not been transparent, and that in fact the point that has originally been made that the refurbishment of Cressingham Gardens estate not being affordable is not borne out by the fact that the HRA debt has dropped to about £350 million, and therefore there is more debt capacity in order to refurbish the estate. Perhaps we could start by addressing that point.
Yes. So to start off with, the HRA business plan, and the link was in the reports, and you can see it yourself, is a 30-year business plan. It lasts over 30 years because that's how long we have to plan for. There's a couple of key points. First of all, the capacity to borrow is dropping because the government, the Conservative government, has just brought in a 4-year period of rent reductions in order to bring down the housing benefit bill. That initially takes out £28 million of revenue from the housing revenue account over those first 4 years. Obviously, over a 30-year period of time, that lost income then is reflected in the lost ability to borrow and a lost ability to cover the cost of borrowing. If you also look over the 30-year period, and obviously it's adjusted on a rolling basis, but if you look at the moment, over 30 years, it's forecast to end up in a deficit of about 194 million based on where we are at the moment, largely as a result of those rent cuts. And as Galinda said, the HRA, if no changes are made, because it's a snapshot picture, if no changes are made, does go into deficit within about 4 years' time. So the HRA, which when we started the consultation in Cressingham in 2012 was reflecting a £56 million shortfall in funding for the LHS, the Lambeth Housing Standard Investment Programme, is now in the February budget forecasting an £85 million deficit, but obviously we have those rent reductions to take into account, the inability to borrow and to fund borrowing going forward, and also a lot of uncertainty coming out of the Housing and Planning Bill, including the potential that at the moment, in order to fund the introduction of right to buy in housing associations, the government is going to tax the HRA and require the council to sell existing council homes on the open market to fund that tax. That obviously then means that we have fewer homes. Fewer homes means less rent coming in. Less rent means less revenue. Less revenue means less borrowing capacity. So the negative picture we start off with is one that's likely to get worse. Obviously, there'll need to be remedial action taken, but it's untrue to say that there is additional borrowing capacity. It's over a 30-year period going negative.
And the other, as I saw it, substantive point made there was that the MPV, sort of the affordability of the Cressingham regeneration is so small over such a long period of time that there's a huge risk that if there's any kind of cost overrun of as little as 1%, if that is the correct figure, that that there's a huge risk connected that hasn't been properly accounted for. Perhaps we could address that point.
So I think it's important to remind the committee that at this stage, these are NPVs based on modelling. There are industry assumptions that go in. There are models on the basis of the number of potential homes that could be built. There are some fairly pessimistic assumptions about things that might go wrong that go in, so that we are very solid and confident about the way that these financial models are done. But at this stage, they are financial models based on those assumptions. And what it does is it tells Cabinet that this is an option that does break even, that does have a positive NPV, and is therefore something that, with all of those assumptions, Cabinet can have confidence in. That confidence is required in order to move forward to the next stage of this process, which has already been talked about, is bringing in master planners who can then start working with residents on the design and layout of new homes and a new estate. That would then lead us eventually to a much more detailed business case, as with Summer Leighton Road that Cabinet's recently had, where originally there was a plan a long time ago that was given an initial okay based on some first assumptions, then much more detailed master planning was done, then a much more detailed business case was brought back to Cabinet. That's the same process that would be followed here. These MPVs give us the confidence that rebuilding is financially feasible, it is something we could have confidence in, and allows the Cabinet to commit funding. So this is something that needs to be developed further. But before any actual money is committed to the rebuilding of the estate, a much more detailed financial case would need to be developed. But at this stage, it's about Cabinet having confidence. This is something which would be sustainable in a positive MPV, with all of the pessimistic assumptions that I've referred to. Gives Cabinet that confidence.
And what about the allegation that the special purpose vehicle that is the council's mechanism for funding and developing the site is some kind of front for Savills, and that they will pursue their own agenda and will be largely out of the control of elected members and the council in order to make the best decisions in terms of what the residents need?
It's an entirely false claim that was made that Savills are going to be running homes for members, and this is something which was addressed at the Cabinet meeting, but for anyone that was at the Cabinet meeting, it was very difficult to hear any responses that were given by officers or members of Cabinet in response to questions that had very, very rightly been raised by residents of the estate, so I'm grateful for the opportunity to address it again. Homes for Lambeth is going to be an entirely council-owned and council-controlled company, which will also be registered as a housing association. By setting up Homes for Lambeth, we can act as our own property developer, which means we don't have to partner with private property developers who would take, as an industry average, a 15 to 20% profit. Instead, we run it as not-for-profit and recycle all the money back into more affordable homes. The Savills connection is because the council needs to register with the Homes and Communities Agency, which is the relevant regulatory body for registered providers of social housing or housing associations. It's a technical process. The council doesn't have the in-house ability to do that. There was a tendering process, and Savills produced the best, came forward and were appointed to carry out that regulatory piece of work. But that is the beginning and the end of their involvement. They'll have no involvement in management. It will be council controlled. The other point about Homes for Lambeth, which I know we addressed when there was a call in on Homes for Lambeth, which is to say it is the means to an end for us, which is that we need to build, we want to build the homes that we know that people in Lambeth need, not just at council rent, but also intermediate and a better product for people who are in the private rented sector where we can offer long-term tenancies. We can't do that without going through this process. If we could do everything through the HRA, it would be an awful lot simpler, but we can't. In order to do all the things that we want to do, we know we need to do, setting up an SPV is the way to go, and it's why Islington, Southwark, Town Hamlets, Ealing, Enfield, amongst others, are all following a very similar method of setting up special purpose vehicles in order to set up.
We can have some order, please. We can have some order, please. Hello. I'm sorry.
You can't
Can we have some
promote the
order?
service here. You silly.
Can we have some order?
You keep talking about the service. Huh?
Yes. Yes.
How much you get from them? Huh? You all have been bribed.
Sorry.
You sold the community. And you shouldn't be here.
Hello.
And I'm gonna bully you. You see how the bully is. You
Hello.
silly.
Hello. Listen, I know people get very upset, but it is not on to slander people and make allegations of which there is no basis, okay, it's actually illegal to do that, and I won't have it in my meeting. If we have to, we'll move straight to the vote, and we won't be able to get the answers to questions, including the one about Savills that I was attempting to get an answer from the cabinet member for. Okay, so, hello, hello.
She's talking to me and I'm answering. So
Okay, if you want to have a different discussion, please leave the room, okay? I'm trying to chair this meeting in order to get Councillor Ainsley and the residents' points addressed.
Whoever she is,
Sorry, it was my
me.
fault.
Get her on.
Okay. So, can we proceed with a bit of order?
So,
Thank you very much.
My question was
Now,
actually about the selling on of homes for land,
Hello.
not just about Savills. Could you
Right.
ask that question, please?